Kind of laid us back. We're going through the book of Hebrews, so we kind of took a break leading up to Easter. We're jumping back in there. I know some people, if you're online or here, you may not have kind of caught up on Hebrews. So last week, your assignment was to listen to the first 20 messages. No, I'm kidding. It wasn't really. That would be a lot. But just to sum up Hebrews, it's talking about Jesus is greater. And it kind of makes the point he's greater than the angels. The angels put in law, priesthood, sacrifices, and really with these warnings to not fall away because of persecution and things that are kind of hitting them in the face. And truthfully, faith is sometimes hard, isn't it? Like on the one hand, it's a better way to live, but sometimes living it out can be problematic because not everybody shares our faith. Sometimes doing the right thing is harder than doing the easy thing or the profitable thing. But it's a much better life, and a life that can be joy-filled in spite of the challenges. Now, does anyone here binge on Netflix ever? Just be honest. The rest of you don't. You're just kind of like, yeah, I do. No, I binge on Hulu or Disney Plus or whatever. And so I kind of feel like we're binging on Old Testament or Hebrew Bible stories. I hate to call it the Old Testament because it sounds like it's not relevant anymore, and it was written in Hebrew, so I often refer to it as Hebrew Bible. And so we're binging on some of those stories, and we're looking at those who came before us and who had faith. And so just to recap slightly from last week, we talked about, because I struggled with, do I do a whole chapter in 1 week? And then I went on a little bit longer, I think, last week. I got some comments that it was a little long. And so, I planned accordingly. I cut off, a half my message this week, and so it'll just be as long as last week. So there's some things to kind of catch up because it's hard to sort of do the whole chapter without some recurring themes and thoughts. And so last week we talked about faith is this resolute confidence in God. And we have faith in a lot of things, right? Most of you are sitting down. I don't know what you're doing at home, but most of us who are here, we're sitting down. And you came in and you sat down. Now, some of you in the back who maybe you haven't sat in the pews in a while because we have a mix of pews and chairs because I don't know, people like both. And so, we have pews and chairs, and you probably didn't check the pew, although it's older, maybe you should have. It's like 200 years old, I don't know. And so, we have chairs in my house growing up that we had a lot of antiques. Ours would sometimes fall apart on their own, though. So those of you who've been to my house, and there's special chairs for Jeff, because Jeff's a big boy. I wasn't allowed to sit in the good chairs anymore. But for the most part, you come in, I know it's laugh at me, I'm heavy. Anyway, it's not my fault, I have an iron allergy. It makes me swell. Anyway, but you sit in a chair, you don't think about it. You kind of have faith in the chair because you've sat in a chair or a pew enough times that you kind of know this thing holds me. And most of us don't think about it. I had to look this up last week. A 747 weighs 485,000 pounds when empty. And, almost a million, just short of 1 million pounds gross weight when it takes off. Now, some of you, like Air Force, you could give me C5s and all that kind of, that data, that's interesting too. But that's a ton of weight, literally tons of weight, 1 million tons of weight. But it's sort of inconceivable that these things fly when you look at planes. I know the physics of it, I know the physics of lift and all that. But it almost seems crazy, but most of us don't give a second thought to it when we get on a plane, right? You just trust that, this thing's flown before, so it's good. And once you've flown enough times, you're just like, whatever. I don't even think about it. I just get on a plane, go somewhere. I don't think too much about, all the things. It goes because you trust it because you've done it. And most of us, get in a knife fight with a surgeon. We don't think much of it, maybe, when you go under. Most of us have procedures and things. I've had so many surgeries. I got a punch card. The next one's free. And I'm trying to decide what to get fixed. No, I've had a lot of orthopedic surgeries. When I go to a new doctor, I have to, they don't make you fill out that thing. I thought about printing out all my stuff because I can't even remember the surgeries when I get in there anymore. I'm like, I forgot one. Had a knees done in 93, 92. Anyway, some of you feel me. This is a high mileage body. We've had a lot of work done to it. Not that kind of work, because you know how I look, but the other kind, the functional work, like my arm doesn't work. But anyway, but it's not natural to have a guy cut you up with a knife, but then it does heal you, make you feel. And a lot of it, we don't think about all these things we do because our experience is we know they're better for us, right? And a lot of times faith is like that. It's natural faith is a learned behavior. It grows with experience. You've tried a chair, you didn't fall over. You sat in a pew, it didn't break. You got on an airplane, it flew. You trusted your surgeon, things got better when you were done. And so there's natural faith, and so it grows over time, so you don't think about it. And spiritual faith is the same way. It's experiences of God being faithful, seeing God be faithful in other people's lives, seeing God being faithful in your own life. It helps us to grow our faith. So that's the preface. Now we're dropping into Hebrews chapter 11, starting verse 17. And I got to slow it down because I've had a lot of espresso today. And I'm excited about this stuff because this is like, they call this like the Hall of Faith. You know, maybe some of you were in a Hall of Fame or Hall of Infamy, I don't know. But, this is like the Hall of Faith, good stuff. And so I'm going to hit some of these stories in. I'll skip some details that are cool. I'll probably hit some details that are awesome. We'll see what happens when we get here. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And so the story is, Abraham had promised that all would be blessed by him. And the problem is he had no kids. And we talked about this last week. It's Sarah and Abraham that they end up having a kid through Abraham. They name him Isaac because it says he laughs, and she kind of laughed at, am I going to have a baby? Because 190. I don't know if you know much about the childbearing years. Like when you, that's usually not a thing, right? And so they have the kid, and then God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, the child they'd waited for. Now, marriage tip. Not going to go well when he gets home, right? If he sacrifices Isaac. Like, hey, honey, that baby you waited forever that you were like 90 when you had? And it's sort of this ethical dilemma for us who, you read this and you're like, what in the heck? Is there human sacrifice? What's going on? And there's all kinds of layers and things to this story. But they basically go on this trip, if you don't know the story. And they're going, they got all the stuff. And Isaac turns to Abraham and says, hey, Father, yes, my son. And I always picture this with my son. Sorry, Josh. We have the fire and the wood, but where's the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son. And they both kind of walk on, and they get to the place. They set up the altar. Isaac's tied up. Dad's with a knife. Imagine that for a second, Josh. And when you get over the nightmares, come talk to me again. But angel shows up. Don't lay a hand on the way. Do not hurt him anyway, for I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. And Hebrews continues in verse 19. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so, in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Now, this story is uncomfortable, right? Like really, if we took the time to explore it and think about it, this is crazy. Like most of us would be like, you want me to what, God? But Abraham, he's willing to offer it all. And there's these hints in the story that he believes God will provide. And really, it's kind of interesting to me, not spending too much time in that story. It's this foreshadowing of Jesus. John 3:16 and 17 says, for this is how God loved the world. He gave his one and only son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God sent his son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. And at Easter, we celebrate that Jesus was tried, crucified, and died, but now he is risen. That's a little deep water touch. We do a woo on the end because we like that. But he is risen. And we have new life. And so all of that is this picture of the sacrifice that is to come. And Abraham's example of faith is that he obeyed God despite potential personal costs, and even despite it being the son he waited so long for, the thing that the promise was supposed to come through, but he trusted God in the middle of that. It says, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. Now, Jacob and Esau, if you don't know the story, each week with the YouVersion, the Bible event, if you open up the Bible app, you can kind of find it. And if Lee usually posts some stuff from it online, if you're following along online. But there's some discussion questions in there. And this we've had this challenge to kind of read these stories because these are awesome stories, but it would take us a long time to go through Genesis. And maybe someday we'll redo this chapter and dig into each person's story, but we aren't going to today because again it's already long enough. Isaac, he has Jacob and Esau, two kids, fought from birth on. Now some of you who have kids know what that's like, right? Like your kids are like, man, they started fighting out of the womb. It's funny. I always see these like boy moms be like, oh, because some boy, little 10-10 section action here, some looks. Because some boys are a little rambunctious. Not me, but some. But, and so, and the story you read, Jacob kind of hangs out with mom. He likes the indoor stuff. He's kind of more like, hey, I want to cook and hang out. Esau is sort of more the outside guy. He likes to kind of go hunting and be in the woods and that kind of thing. And so if you read the story, Esau comes in one time and he's so hungry. He's like, I'm so hungry. Give me some of your soup. And Jacob's like, oh, you want some soup? I'll trade you the birthright. And he's like, you can have it. I don't care. I'm going to die. What is it? And he kind of doesn't really care about it. Gets the soup, but now he's got the birthright. And then later if you read the story, Isaac's giving his blessing. We got Jacob and Esau, and they're like, Esau's supposed to go out and get some wild game. Jacob puts sheepskin on him and dresses all up, got the Esau cologne on and everything, and trying to trade it off and they trick, his mom, tricks him so that he gets the blessing, and then Jacob and Esau, Esau's like, hey, remember that Cain and Abel story? I want to reenact that because you're going to die when, and so he has to run off to a foreign land. All this kind of crazy stuff comes. They eventually make, but again, this blessing passes through them. And this blessing was an important thing. It's passing on the blessing and the promise from Abraham. And Isaac believed in the fulfillment of a promise not yet fulfilled, right? Because your descendants will be numerous as the sands of the seashore. It stars in the sky. It's not quite happened. It's just like a little bit of progress, but we're not there yet. And Isaac still believes. Verse 21 says, by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshiped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Now, Joseph, if you don't know the story, the coat of many colors, if you will, he kind of he comes up to his brothers, he's having these dreams, he gets a special gift from dad, and he's got he's having dreams of being, superior to them and everything. And so they do what brothers do sometimes, they put the beat down on him. But do something a little further than most brothers do, they sell him into slavery. That's your kids have probably been bad, but have any of them sold the other one into slavery yet? Okay, this is bad stuff, right? This is not oh my gosh. It's funny when if you read the Bible growing up as a kid and you miss some parts and then you read it later as an adult and you're like, oh my gosh. And so, he gets sold into slavery, but he rises to prominence there. And then, he gets accused of trying to his master's wife tries to seduce him, and then he kind of flees, but he gets framed for it anyway, gets thrown in prison. He's in prison, kind of rises up through there a little bit, and he's taking care of things. The king's servants are in there. He correctly interprets dreams. He's like, remember me, and they forget him, and he's stuck in prison still. And finally, Pharaoh kind of calls him out because he needs someone to interpret a dream. He does it well. He rises he's number 2 now in the kingdom. And if you know the story, then his brothers have to come to him because there's a famine and they don't recognize him. I cry every time I read this story because it's this powerful story, and he's kind of freaking them out because when they realize it's him, they're like, oh man, last time I saw you was when I was selling you into slavery. And they're thinking it's all going to go bad. It goes well. He forgives them. He has 2 sons, and he brings them to, his dad to bless, and his dad does the whole whoosh, flips the hands around and blesses them because, just like Jacob and Esau, with his sons. It's a really cool story. But again, there's this blessing, And each of his sons become a tribe. And it's this image, this old guy leaning on his walker, still believing God, even though he saw part of that promise. He's seeing part of that promise come true. It says, by faith, Joseph, when he was in there, he spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Joseph, he has this prophecy, you're going to leave, and when you leave Egypt, bury me with Abraham, Sarah, and everybody. Like back, remember, because in the promised land, in the promised land, the only thing they really owned at this point was a cave to bury bodies in. And he said, hey, this is again, the dream's not there, but we're still believing God. And then if you kind of continue on with the story, if you know the story, so they're there. And it says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child and they were not afraid of the king's edict. He was no ordinary child. And we all think that of our kids, right? They're no ordinary child. Kind of thought he was for good or bad. He's no ordinary child. I don't know where this guy's from. Well, it won't be gender specific. We don't know where she's from. Girls can be terrorists too, right? And so there's no, if you know the story, basically later pharaohs forget all that Joseph's done. The people get numerous, and actually it's funny. I'm often in these academic debates and things about, dating the Exodus and everything, because you're trying to look for evidence and all these things. And there's like things in Egypt's history where there's these people groups that kind of rise up, and there's a lot of them and everything. It's fascinating stuff for like 4 of us, and the 4 of us will get together later, have coffee, and discuss this. The rest of us don't want to hear it. And so later pharaohs forget Joseph. Israelites get too numerous. They become like a security threat. And if you don't know, so they order to kill the baby boys, and Moses gets saved after birth. They stick him in, when it was they couldn't hide him any longer. They stick him in a little boat and float him over to the Pharaoh's daughter. And she's like, oh, look, a puppy. She takes Moses in. And so, kind of adopts him into the family, so to speak. If you don't know the story, you should read the story. It's a good story. It says this, verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Refused to be known as Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, it was like growing up in the palace, it was like growing up in the White House, or we don't really have royalty, maybe like growing up with a ton of money, growing up with privilege, growing up, he had everything set up, he was cool, but instead of associating with that, he associated with God's people. He forsook opportunity in order to be faithful. And if you know the story, he goes and he sees an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew slave, and he kills him, which again, we're not advocating, but things happen. Not everything that happened in the Bible is maybe what God planned, but he shows mistreatment over the fleeting pleasures. There's a saying in wrestling, I know they use it a lot of sports, it's, pain is temporary, pride is forever. Anyone ever hear that when growing up? It was like, if you grew up in the 80s, if you heard that, it was like we had it like on the wall and everything. I remember in the wrestling room. And I tell you, now that I'm older, that pain is not temporary. It comes back. Things ache. I wake up with a sprained ankle and I'm like, when did I do that? I think 1986. Some of you'll understand. Not entirely true because I have the aches and pains, but the real truth is life is temporary, but life in God is forever. And so Moses forsakes the pleasures in this life for this greater opportunity to serve God. And it says in verse 27, by faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood so the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. And so he takes off, he goes, there's a burning bush, and God shows up in this burning bush. Maybe you've heard the story, and Moses is like, who dis? And he says, I am who I am. And that's, we've done a lot of great sermons, and well, maybe not great sermons, we've done a lot of sermons talking about the great I am. He is who he is. And then he comes back, and there's plagues. The plagues are awesome. Again, we're kind of doing like the quick view. I'm not plagues are awesome, like, oh boy, can't wait for a plague of frogs. But if you look at them, it's interesting because they're all kind of mocking the Egyptian gods. Like, oh, you think frogs are sacred? Here, now they're all over. You think the Nile is something? I'll turn it into blood. And so God is just proving, hey, I'm above your gods. I am the God. And the last one is this Passover, which, the story of Easter coincides with Passover because, they had to sacrifice a lamb to redeem the firstborn. They had to put the blood on the outside of the doors and everything. And then God comes in and there's death everywhere except where the blood is. And there's all this representation of, who Christ is to come. And that's the whole Passover meal finds its true fulfillment in Jesus. All these things, again, are looking forward to the promises that are to come. And so, there's all this. And so, and then they get out. And it says, by faith the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. When the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. And if you don't know the story, they get to go out in the desert. They're going to take off. And they kind of get led to, if you look at the geography, a place where they were trapped. The Egyptians are coming. They got the Red Sea to their back. And it's sort of, I picture like scary music or something going in. Like, there's like dramatization. Yeah, those things, dramatizations of this, and they got their back to the, Red Sea. What are you going to do? This giant army's approaching you. They've got chariots and swords and all kinds of, and God kind of like just parts the Red Sea. And I always want, because it says they walk through on dry land. I picture what's this like, because some of the videos you see like whales and stuff in there. I don't know if there's whales in the Red Sea. I didn't look that up for today. but it's like they're just kind of walking through, and then the Egyptians pursue them, and then the water takes care of them all. And so there you go. And so it reminds me of, because anybody remember this old song? You guys will, because, God will make a way where there seems to be no way. If I remember that, God will make a... Some of you are younger, have no idea what I'm talking about. Some of you are a little bit older. But it's funny because I looked up that song and why it was written, and it has no... to this context, but it's like God will make a way where there seems to be no way. Slightly out of context, the original song, but that is it. God makes a way, right? And there seemed to be no hope. And so an example of faith is he obeys God despite the temptations to wealth and power, despite apparent military defeat. Moses keeps the faith and the Israelites are saved. And it says, by faith, the wall of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. I don't know how much you guys know about military tactics, or maybe you've heard this story. I remember hearing this story as a kid, but it seems even crazier now that I'm older. And if you know the story, it's, they leave, it's 40 years, they're lost in the desert because Moses wouldn't ask for directions. No, there's a reason, and people were unfaithful. And Joshua takes the lead, and they're going to take this city, and their battle plan they're given is like march around the city, once a day. Now that might kind of scare them or something, but it's not really, a very good tactic. Then march around, 7 times and blow trumpets and shout. So they do this. The walls fall, and it's sort of this kind of crazy tactic. I remember as a younger believer, we were working in old camp. I used to work in a state park, and we sold campsites and everything. We couldn't make like the big prayer meeting at the church where everybody was praying, so I like marched around the booth 7 times and gave a shout. Man, the people in the camp look at you funny. But I did make one friend who kind of figured out, she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, da, da, da. And then we became friends, and she teaches piano up in Phoenixville. So, hey, I doubt you're watching these. I haven't seen you in 30 years. But it's a terrible plan unless it's God. But that's what God was doing. And God brings a victory. And it says, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And if you don't know the story, Rahab, we'll keep it PG-13, she had a particular vocation, which would not be one that we would recommend. And she helps the Israelites because she hides the spies. She hides them. And here's the cool thing. If you haven't read all of the New Testament, if you don't pick up on little names and things, whose genealogy does she end up in? Jesus's. Because, and there's a lot of things, here's the thing, your past doesn't dictate your future with God. She had a past and she had a future. I doubt she saw that coming, right? Like, I doubt she's like, I'm going to do this, and then eventually the Savior of the world is going to come through my line. Probably not, right? Sometimes we don't even understand the extent of the blessings of our faithfulness. We may not see the blessings. Sometimes they're right in front of us and we'll reach them. Like, we see that, hey, if I'm faithful, this will happen. And I think a lot of times with sports, I think of that because okay, I can attain this if I stay focused, if I do these things, if I train hard, if I, and you can achieve those things. Like, and so there's blessings you kind of catch up. And sometimes there's blessings we enjoy now. Because sometimes faithfulness really does bring you into a place of, even spiritual and material blessing. There's this concept in missionary stuff where it's called lift. And basically, if you stop, using your money to do all the things you shouldn't do, eventually your family prospers and does better in a lot of social situations. So there's blessings we enjoy now often for being in Christ. Even though there are hard things sometimes, there are good things. There are blessings to be in Christ. But sometimes the real blessings follow us as after we pass through life. You may not see them until eternity. You might go through hard stuff now that somehow shape and change things, and future generations may receive those blessings. Now, last week we read from 1 Peter. I really think 1 Peter is a good complement to Hebrews 11, but I'm going to read the verse again. 1 Peter 2:11 says, "Dear friends, I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from the worldly desires that wage war against your very souls." Temporary residents and foreigners. I love that. Some translations say aliens and strangers. And I picture that alien head from Roswell. I don't know. Anyone else have emojis in their heads when they're reading? Okay. A couple of us, some of you are looking at me like I'm a weirdo. I am, but I'm your weirdo. I love you guys. Because, interactions are different. When you're a tourist, they're different when you own a place. I use the analogy, you go to a hotel room and it's drafty, what do? You don't caulk the windows. You don't fix things. You don't replace the drapes with something. You're temporary. You just turn the heat up. You don't care. You turn the air conditioning. Do you turn the air conditioning down or up to make it colder? Spring forward, fall back. I can never remember that. Or is it spring back, fall forward? I don't know. That's why I'm glad my phone just tells me what the time is. I don't know. We're not going to get into daylight savings. But, you live differently because the place is not permanent. You don't, take up residence on a plane. You don't, because you're only there for an hour or 10 or 12 or 23, whatever your long flight is. Unfortunately, most of my flights are really, really long. Which is not good at times. But anyway, but you don't, it's not your home. And so this world, it ultimately is not our home. It doesn't mean we can't buy a good home. It doesn't mean we can't live well. Life can be fun. I laugh a lot. If you hang out with me, I laugh. Usually at bad dad jokes. And usually at least one of the kids from kids' church comes up afterwards and tells me a good dad joke. So if, I don't know if their teacher down there shares dad jokes with them to bring up to me. I don't know. I love them. But it's okay to laugh. Life can be fun. I laugh a lot. But the ultimate focus isn't this journey. This journey gets us to and prepares us for our final destination. And again, Franklin Covey, and I'll probably say this next week too, because I just love, I've read a lot of business books. You go into I have a whole giant section on my shelves that are full of business books, and some of them are absolutely worthless. Some of them it's I had to read for a class, but it was I don't even understand this one. One of them is because a guy named Jeff Dyer wrote it, and I had to buy a book by Jeff Dyer because it's not me though. Someone thinks I'm this business writer. I'm not that guy. Anyway, I get tweeted by people sometimes because they think I'm him, which is funny to me. Anyway, but an old classic is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of them is begin with the end in mind. I think for us, live with the end in mind. No matter what we're going through, Whether it's good times, bad times, hard things, challenging things, temptations, all these things, live with the end in mind. And we live knowing, I don't know if you know this, death rate hovers at around 100%. You know, we like to hide from it in our culture. We like to, act like it's not going to happen to us. But I assure you it is. Unless Jesus comes back, we all going to die. Now, you could think of that as like kind of sad, but it makes you live purposefully because your time is limited. And it means we live with the end in mind, and we live purposefully when we understand what God is calling to us. And we have this dual citizenship because I have responsibilities here. Like I have to go to work, Josh and I were talking yesterday while it's funny, we were loading bricks, and I was thinking, and tomorrow we're going to talk about the, Israelites in bondage in Egypt, and we were loading bricks, and I couldn't help but think of the funniness of that. But we were talking, and it's like, we're talking about like things people say, like, do what you love and you won't, work a day in your life. I don't think that's true because I do what I love, and I still have long, hard days because sometimes you just got to work. Not everything, but there's also great blessings in life. And so, we kind of live this dual citizenship where I have responsibilities. I have to work, and some parts of my job I don't like. Don't worry, it's not you guys. I love you guys. But paperwork mostly. We vote, we pay taxes, we invest for the future. There's stuff we have to do. And we can enjoy life. It is a gift from God. I love life. I enjoy life. But, my feet may be in here in Delaware, but my heart belongs to God. My heart belongs to eternity. And so even how I live here is affected by my belief in an afterlife, my belief in a God who gives us certain ways to live. And when Jesus calls us into a relationship, then our lives should look different. We did a whole series called Live Differently because we should live differently because of our faith. And that's the conundrum of it all, because we're not made right with God by what we do. But when we're made right with God by his grace, it changes the way we live. You don't live the same way. You kind of live with a different intention. And, it's often been said, actions speak louder than words. Matthew 5:16, in the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Our good shine. James 3:13, if you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom. And so we live differently because we have this faith. And we have these examples of faith. And as I said last week, I picture sometimes, it's like, Neil Armstrong on the moon. I wrote it down so I remember. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And I think sometimes we think like, okay, I take one step of faith and then I got to just leap. And that's can be true, but I think a lot of times it's all these little steps, like all the steps that got him to the moon, got him to take that one step and take that giant leap. And a lot of times when we're living this life of faith, it's hard because we're trying to go from 0 to 60. But if you just start living out your faith slowly in smaller steps, it becomes something you can take those bigger leaps. I'm at a different place now than I was 25 years ago. I can take bigger jumps. And faith is learning to take the small steps, living what we know, and ultimately you can take the bigger steps. Sometimes faith in God means obeying God even when you're not sure what's next. We were talking yesterday, men's group, we get together as men and do a little group, and, we get together on Saturday mornings, and there's no breakfast. I mean, it used to be breakfast, pre-COVID, so if people thought we just got up for bacon, which would be good enough reason to get up on Saturday, but, maybe some scrapple. Maybe we're going to have to do a breakfast here soon. It'll have to be on a rainy day where we're not going to bike afterwards because I can't eat a big giant scrapple sandwich and bike. Anyway, some of you don't know we bike. Anyway, some of us do anyway. Not as much lately, but now it's warming up. Anyway, so I told this I call it the tire story, and some of you have heard it before, but it bears repeating because it was a powerful moment for me. We'd moved to California, and that was like a distant and foreign land for some of you. If you grew up here and moved to like LA, Come on, that's been, and I remember people thought we were nuts. I'm like, well, it's not like no one else has ever lived there, you know. And it was like before the internet was big, there was just Indian food recipes on the internet. Then it was a good time. It was before hatred. Oh man, I should get some statistics on how bad the internet was then. We used to have used a modem and used a phone line. There was no such thing as Wi-Fi. Kids are like, how did your phones connect? We didn't have phones. You just drove across the country and said, I'll call you because I've got your number. Anyway, but I remember we moved to California, and it's a little scary because, I mean, even though we had family and stuff, you move out there and you're just kind of like, we had no jobs really. We kind of was going to school, but like we were like, but God was providing. But it was like I got a flat tire, just ran over a nail or something. Now in those days, I didn't really know how to do this stuff. Now I just like core it myself and fix it, no problem. I didn't know, and I was like, okay. So I determined where I was going to go because I was like, okay, I know this place because there's a chain and it's back home. I'm driving down Colorado Boulevard. Terror of Colorado Boulevard. Anyway, just picture it. It's palm trees. And anyway, so I'm driving, and I remember I really felt God say, stop here and get your tire fixed. And I was like, there's this tire place. And I had time to turn. And faithful person that I was, I said no. And I drove right past that tire place. But I could not shake it. Like, I was just like, this is God speaking. And this is like of the dumbest things. Like, really pull over and get your tire fixed here? But I'm having these debates in my head, like some of us have. I don't know if anyone's ever felt like God speaking. Yeah, and so I know this sounds crazy to some of you. And so I looped back around. If you've ever been to LA, it's like, there's all these like one-way streets and everything. So I missed it, and I was like, I couldn't share a double back. And I pull in, and I'm like, hey, I got a nail in the tire. I think you need to fix it. He goes, oh, no problem, we'll fix that. And so I didn't even ask him how much it was. I had very little money. I was like a, broke college student, married, and, I'm a broke graduate school student, and I'm like, but I'm just going to trust. And so, like, he gets done there, he goes, so how much owe you? He says, oh, nothing. On the house, just next time you buy tires, think about me. And I'm like, thank you. And I really felt like God saying, hey, trust me. I got your back in this. I know you moved across country. You don't know what you're doing. Now I understand the whole system and things. And, I didn't even really understand what degree I should be getting. I didn't, we didn't know where we were going to be working. We were working temp jobs, in different places. And everything. But God took care of me. I left all I knew for the strange land of California. Here's the thing. If I can trust him with a tire, I can trust him with the big things. Because God cares about the little things in our lives. And God will, take care of things. Now, we all have trials and pressures, not tire pressure. But we can be sure that when we trust him, it'll ultimately end in good. There are times when promises don't seem to happen. There's friends and families don't come to faith. Jobs and promotions don't come through. People get sick and die. Marriages fail. All the things that we pray for, hope for, don't come true at times. And ultimately, faith in God centers us in this crazy world, though. It helps us find peace, even when the world seems to fall apart, even when our world seems to fall apart. And we hold on to faith, even when the outcome seems dim or the chances seem slim. When it seems like faith hurts more than it helps. But faith doesn't get us out of the pain. But it gives us the strength and the hope to endure and to trust that ultimately there is a better future.